Hello and welcome once again to The Blueprints. This is Canada's Conservative Podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Schmale, Member of Parliament for Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes, Brock, with new content for you every single Tuesday, 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Happy Canada Day. We are not taking time off. We will have new programs for you. And because of that, we ask that you like, comment, subscribe, and share this program. Also, download it, listen to it on platforms like CastBox, iTunes, Google Play, and Spotify at your convenience. It is out there for you. So today's show, we are talking about something that seems to have gone by lately. It's common sense. What is common sense? Where is it? It seems like the new sanity is the old insanity. And to talk about that, we have Rick Perkins, a good friend of the show. South Shore St. Margarets is the riding. Great to have you on.
Glad to be here, Jamie.
What is common sense? Common sense is what is often known as something most people agree with, right? It is
most people
common sense.
Yeah. I think most people, the people who elect us, don't see a lot of it in Ottawa in elected office, and government and bureaucracy tend to create things that don't seem to be very common sense the way you would do things normally as a normal person throughout this country. Governments seem to have all kinds of insanity that they do, and I guess we'll talk a bit about some of those examples.
It just seems, especially on the left, they don't want to be associated with the common people, right?
No.
The common, it's all, they're yucky and there's too many of them, right? Like, we have to say something absolutely outrageous to be seen as intellectually better than the common people. But what they're saying is absolutely, in some cases, pure insanity, and we're all expected to go along with it.
Yeah, we see that all the time. We see it obviously with woke government that seems to prefer its divisive sort of politics, dividing one group of people or one region of Canada against the other. And a lot of that doesn't make most sense to most people, because I think most people, I'm from Nova Scotia, the East Coast, we all just think we're just good old happy Canadians all across the country, and aren't trying to say, well, you shouldn't be able to earn a living in that part of the country because you do a certain type of work, or I shouldn't be able to do it this way. And the government seems to be trying to pick winners and losers and tell us in everything that we do. And a great example is in the session we just wrapped up, is Bill C-18. Now, Bill C-18 doesn't mean anything to anybody except people that are here. But it's we call it the Liberal online news censorship bill to go along with the social media censorship bill they did a little earlier, C-11. And what this does is it says, it's a bill that makes no sense to me, because it says, because you or I or any of the people that are watching post a link on social media, that somehow that link means that the companies that provide you that ability to share amongst your friends, the world, your associates, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, wherever you do it, that somehow because you share that link, those platforms who aren't in control of what you and I post on it should pay a fee. But the fee is to the government, right? So that the government can take money from those successful platforms and redistribute it to traditional media, as we call it, that is maybe not getting the success that they used to. It's sort of like if we said, everyone who makes a computer now has to pay a certain percentage of their profits to people who make pencils. It doesn't seem to make sense to me that we use profitable countries and the way companies and the way things evolve in our society to pay for stuff that people no longer use.
So in that vein, and in the conversation of common sense, right? It's the agreed upon consensus, the widely agreed upon consensus that of what is Airfinger's quote called normal, right?
Right.
So in your conversation with C-18 and C-11, the social media censorship bill, the Liberals are basically upending all of that, because at one time, in our lifetimes, not too long ago, probably about a year or so ago, it was still okay in this country to disagree with the liberal narrative or the left's opinion on something, right? But now, because they're just saying the most outrageous things, and if anybody disagrees with them, they are offside, off track, and need to be canceled, right? Like, this is coming all together with that legislation, with the topic of common sense, that it's almost outlawing any dissenting opinion other than what the government narrative is.
You have issues or examples, for example, in this bill, where you say, you know what, if I share an opinion, we have lots of new ways that people consume media now. They're called Substacks and that kind of thing. Jen Gerson, who used to be a mainline reporter and commentator with National Post and other newspapers, has become a journalist entrepreneur and is a co-founder, co-owner of one online called The Line, where there was a lot of reporting and political commentary. And guess what? If you post a link to that site, the social media platform's now going to have to pay a fee for the fact that you did. They're not posting the article. It's just a link. They're not breaking copyright law. We're not breaking copyright law when you do that. Otherwise, you'd be charged a fee. So, but where does all that money go? And we have in the House of Commons a parliamentary budget officer. That's an independently appointed financial watchdog who does reports for parliamentarians to try and understand the financial implications of what government initiatives are. And the parliamentary budget officer has said 3/4 of the money that will be raised and given to the CRTC to redistribute goes to the CBC, Bell, and Rogers. So all of that generated information and flow and ideas that maybe the CBC doesn't agree with, they'll actually get money back as the biggest beneficiary of this government's bill. I'm sure it'll be shocking that the Liberals have found another way to give the CBC more money, this time by the things that you post that are unrelated to the CBC and their opinions. These platforms will have to do it. And the platforms are saying we may not do that. They may shut off your ability to share in a free, open, and democratic society ideas that we share because of this government imposition of tax. And this is how they're going to control the media. It doesn't make any common sense, right? They're trying to control the message by forcing all of these independent voices to no longer be available on the places where people go. People don't go to TV that much anymore to watch the news. They go to their social media feeds to get their news and information and commentary. That may disappear if the government continues to persist on this, as it happened for a while in Australia when this was done. And they had to change the approach and the law as a result of that.
It's amazing the approach this government will take to implement kind of the agenda. The stuff that they kind of think about that don't really say it out loud, they're actually moving forward quite quickly with the stuff that, you know, in many years past, conservatives will say, I think the left's up to something here, and it'd be just dismissed, right? They're actually full on right now. It's for all to see what their true motives are.
And a great common sense issue has been this issue we've been dealing with for quite a while, since the 2021 election, but in the news the last couple of months, which is China's interference in our electoral process. So 3 times the House of Commons, Commons, we represent common sense, supposedly. We are the ones that bring the voice of our communities. 3 times the House of Commons has voted for a public inquiry into China's interference in our electoral system. What's the Prime Minister do? Understand, the Prime Minister is appointed, right? We don't elect a Prime Minister in Canada. We elect members of Parliament. The only part of our system where people are elected is you and I and our other colleagues and 336 colleagues, other 336 colleagues in the House. We represent that democratic process. So the appointed Prime Minister has refused to implement the democratic will 3 times of the House of Commons to have a public inquiry, instead chose to appoint another person who was appointed, who then came out and recommended that he alone, as an appointed person appointed by an appointed Prime Minister, should actually be the guy who does the investigation into potential Chinese interference in our elections, ignoring the will of the democratically elected House of Commons 3 times. It's kind of ironic. It doesn't make common sense to me, that if you're going to interfere in the or investigate the most fundamental breach of our democracy, and that you should actually listen to the democracy, and what the democracy wants is voiced in the House of Commons of how to investigate that. Yet common sense hasn't prevailed, and they continue to want to appoint somebody to do it until we finally force that individual, Mr. Johnson, to resign. Even the Prime Minister didn't do it. So now maybe there'll be a public inquiry, but they haven't said that they'd have a public inquiry. So I think most people in Canada have shown that they want a public inquiry into our most fundamental issue of whether or not a foreign country is interfering in our democracy. But yet, and common sense predicts that it says that we should have a public inquiry to find out what's going on. The House of Commons has said that. Yet this Prime Minister, this Liberal Prime Minister, chooses yet again to ignore common sense, maybe because he benefits from a lack of transparency into what China's been doing in our electoral process.
The House of Commons members representing the common people, the House of Commons. They also voted a few years ago to table the documents as to why two scientists linked to Beijing were suddenly fired out of a top secret lab in Winnipeg. It got to the point where the head of the organization had to come to the bar. It's called coming to the bar and being told you must produce these documents. Of course, that person refused. The speaker tried to rule on that, went as far as I think he could, and then the government took the speaker to court. The democratically elected House of Commons to court to stop a will of the people.
The guardian of our rights as parliamentarians is the Speaker of the House of Commons. In other words, the guardian of our democracy as we operate day to day in the House. And the government actually took him to court. Why? Because we wanted to find out the real story about why Chinese scientists were fired from our biological lab working on viruses before all of COVID happened, and what happened to the transfer of some of that information back to, shockingly, it's alleged that it went back to the biological lab in Wuhan, China, that there is a direct link, and yet the government is trying to shut down the common sense approach of the House of Commons, which is to find out and get to the truth. Citizens deserve the truth. And governments that try to defy the will of Parliament and hide what it is they're up to really are quite despicable in my view. And that's what frustrates people, the common sense. We get it every day. How many emails do you get a day saying, why can't we get this Prime Minister out of there? Why can't you have a confidence vote in the House? We do have confidence votes. Yeah. Every money bill is a confidence vote. Every budget is a confidence vote. Unfortunately, the costly coalition with the NDP, who are ignoring the roots of their party as a social democratic party. I don't agree with the social democratic party, but some of their founders, from Tommy Douglas to Stanley Knowles, would be rolling over in their grave at how this group of NDP MPs just rubber stamp and support everything these Liberals want to do without any consequence. Not yet, anyway. Ultimately, there's a consequence in the election,
hopefully. Yeah, common sense would also say that we want a very competitive energy market to produce the next great thing, but yet the government is deciding, well, we're going to give tens of billions of dollars to a couple of companies only to try to out-subsidize China and the United States, but mostly the United States, right? They're trying to out-subsidize them. And whether or not the technology works, we're not sure. The market's not really demanding electric vehicles yet for a whole bunch of reasons. Everyone has their own reason, whether they want one or don't. But this is the government that always kind of rages against big corporations, but yet they're the ones supporting big corporations the whole way through.
These are the largest subsidies that we've actually seen to corporations in Canadian history, and they're not Canadian corporations, by the way.
Well, that too, yes.
They're foreign corporations, and there's more to come. The parliamentary budget officer estimates that the Volkswagen subsidy, battery subsidy, $16 billion. Understand, Volkswagen produces more revenue every year than the government of Canada does in taxes. But yet, we feel the need to subsidize to $16 billion the production of those batteries, and the government has promised there are more coming. You know, I think a common sense approach in the whole world of electric vehicles and emission-free is not to say you must drive this kind of car. You know, that Ottawa
Right.
knows best
Yeah.
and says you got to drive this kind of car. I think we can agree that we'd like to have fewer, if not zero emissions from any vehicles that we drive. And I think that's the role of the government to say, you know, by X date, all vehicles should be emission-free. Let the market decide whether or not it's an emission-free internal combustion engine they want to buy, whether it's a hybrid or whether it's an electric vehicle. Let the market decide that. Let the companies develop the technology. We're not that far from zero-emission internal combustion engines. In fact, in some ways, that was already done many years ago with Mercedes and a diesel engine they had called Blue Tech. So why shouldn't the market and technology decide what type of vehicle works for you in the circumstance, whether you're rural, urban, or downtown? All of them are different circumstances, the state of your family, what you do for a living. It shouldn't be the government in Ottawa that does that. A common sense approach is let the market decide what vehicles. The government can set the emission target. Let the markets, both the manufacturers and the people, decide what type of vehicle they want.
And as we said many times, it might be EVs, it might not be.
It might not.
There might be something else out there that is better, but yet if you dump all these taxpayer dollars into one avenue, you're going to have slower innovation, and we're not necessarily going to have the best price. While at the same time, we've been saying for many episodes, we watch as the Communist Party of China carves up Africa, you know, trades shoddy infrastructure for port access, mineral rights, drilling rights around mineral-rich areas that are basically cornering the avenue on this EV market, right? Using child labor in some cases, horrible environmental policy, buying the lithium mine in Argentina, right? Like they are cornering this market while our government shuts down our energy sector and basically handing it all over to other governments with ulterior motives and not necessarily promoting freedom.
It's not just there, Jamie, it's worse than that. The Liberal government allowed China to buy Canada's only lithium producing mine, only in Manitoba, called the Tanko mine. And they own it. The Chinese government owns it. It's our only producing lithium mine. And 100% of the lithium goes to China for the use, for us to buy back whatever battery parts we want from China using Canadian lithium. It's incredible. The Parliament has been studying a bill on revisions to the Investment Canada Act, the rules for foreign investment into Canada. And one of the things that we've been pushing in the industry committee is that the threshold for a state-owned enterprise, a company owned by a foreign government, for review should be reduced to $0. In other words, anytime a state-owned enterprise comes in here to buy a piece of land or to buy a small company, that needs to be reviewed for our natural interest and national security reasons. Right now, it's a formula, and this year it's $512 million. So China can come in and buy anything it wants in Canada under $512 million without any government scrutiny. And they're doing it in my riding. My riding is heavy. My biggest industry is commercial fishing. And the Chinese government entities have been buying up the lobster buyers, the processors, the on-land part of the process of seafood, not the ocean, not the catching the fish, but the control of the other parts of the supply chain. And all of those are $5, $10 million plus acquisitions, way below. And they're doing that in farmland in Western Canada. They're acquiring a lot. And we naively, there's no common sense here saying, what's in Canada's interest to have these critical natural resource processes and our farmland, our mineral rights on the prairies. China owns a lot of the mineral rights on the prairies, that we've allowed this to happen. And they do not have our interests at heart. And the Liberals have allowed this country to become more of a branch plant economy. These jobs that we talk about with Volkswagen, they're not manufacturing jobs. They're assembling a battery of parts made elsewhere. And it's just one component of the vehicle. So look, any jobs I'm sure people are thrilled to have in Southwest Ontario, but $16 billion, the parliamentary budget officer estimates it's a $5 million a job subsidy for that one contract. $5 million a job. pretty expensive way to get jobs into Southwest Ontario.
And we are almost choosing not to be competitive with China and other countries, to be fair, because we, in many cases, overregulate ourselves. Here in Ontario, we have some of the highest electricity rates anywhere in North America. That's because the Kathleen Wynne and Dalton McGuinty Liberals decided they'd basically shut down our energy sector and pick winners and losers, solar panels and wind farms, which take massive amounts of concrete, by the way. A lot of the material not recyclable and coming to their life cycle very soon. Not to mention all the birds and issues with health. Aside from all of that, we're choosing on purpose, through government decree, not to be competitive.
Well,
one
of the things that makes us, in addition to that makes us uncompetitive, is carbon tax 1 and 2. You know, we know that the Liberals have never met a carbon reduction target that they've set out. And we know that Canada is like about 1.5% of the world's carbon emissions. But the carbon tax on fuel is a tax on everything. And everybody is struggling right now with the cost of everything going up. And the reason the cost of everything going up is because anything you buy has to move.
That's right.
It's got to move somewhere in a vehicle. It's got to be shipped from somewhere. And so that means that we're adding costs. Now, our biggest competitor and most important trading partner, the United States, where most of our goods and services go, does not have a carbon tax. So what we're doing is we're pricing, even on export, we're pricing the goods we try to sell the U.S. out of the market because they've got the carbon tax costs added on the manufacturing process everywhere through. Every piece has to be transported in a truck, and then and as you mentioned, the energy rates are going up, and there's massive power taxes, carbon taxes on energy rates that are piled on top of the energy rates. All of that is built in and built into the price, which means our goods are much more expensive to buy in the United States than they used to be. And the result is that we are less competitive, and because we're less competitive, we'll sell fewer goods. We sell fewer goods, we have fewer jobs. And that basic common sense economics doesn't seem to get through to this Liberal government, that when you put the price of everything up, our economy becomes less competitive. And the best example of that is something called per capita GDP income.
Yes.
In other words, how much growth per person in Canada does our economy have every year? And for decades, our growth has basically been about the same percentage as the United States, which would make sense given how intertwined our economies are. Since 2015, the United States per capita GDP, so economic growth per person in the United States, has grown 40% higher than Canada. 40%, that's never happened in our history with the United States. And that's only since 2015, as the Trudeau government has made everything less competitive. They've chosen to basically destroy our oil and gas industry and then say, oops, I guess we've got to bring some other industry back, so we'll just subsidize other types of industries to bring them back, when we had a fully competitive, functioning economy producing goods that the world needs.
Yep. And
the
was
world
affordable, proven, available.
And the cleanest in the world, environmentally.
Absolutely. And the fact that government has created such a poisonous atmosphere for business investment that the government then has to turn around and take the tax dollars they do have to entice companies to invest or even set up shop to begin with in an environment they know is not conducive to actually, and I know it's a bad word in some leftist circles, making a profit.
And you know what the common sense question of that is after that? What happens to those businesses when the subsidies stop?
That's exactly right.
Because if it requires a subsidy to be built, if it requires a subsidy to be sold, it's not the market forces driving the sale of that good, it's government subsidy. And when the government subsidy of $7,500 in EV disappears, or the government subsidy on producing these batteries disappears in 2033, what happens to the price of those goods, or what happens to those jobs?
That's right.
You get in this, in May, the finance minister, Chrystia Freeland, said, oh, you shouldn't be competing. We shouldn't be, she said this in Washington. Of course, she wouldn't say it in Canada because she's not here much. But she said in Washington that subsidizing and competing with the United States on Joe Biden's Inflation Act, they call it the Inflation Reduction Act, but when you're spending $1 trillion, that's inflationary. The Inflation Reduction Act, as they call it, that we can't compete with that. That's, as she said, quotes, a race to the bottom. And then only 1 month later, they lead the charge in the race to the bottom with this VW contract and more to come. So when you create a subsidized economy, you create a false economy. In Canada, just taxpayers can't afford that. We don't have that kind of money. And when those subsidies end, we've seen it before, there have been companies in Southwest Ontario that
Ontario's a perfect example, absolutely.
And then when the subsidies ended, what happened, Jamie?
No more wind turbines made in Ontario.
Heinz
no more
Ketchup
solar
left the country.
Yeah, they all left.
They all left.
Yep.
When the subsidy ends, if you chase subsidies, you end up losing or having to spend these subsidies all the time in a socialized false economy. It's not a free market economy then.
Yeah, you're almost prolonging the inevitable.
Right.
That's the problem.
Right.
Rick, I have so many more questions. We can go on this forever. We got to get out of here, though. Final thoughts are on you.
Well, I just think that common sense is generally a tough thing to find in governments overall, certainly in bureaucracy. But what we're going to be bringing to the table for voters as we hopefully approach an election in the next year or so is common sense solutions for the common people of Canada so that we can bring home lower paychecks. That's the only way we're going to get more powerful paychecks, is to stop some of this insanity that's happening in Ottawa, bring common sense back so we can produce powerful paychecks for people, reduce the costs of homes for people, and make life overall more affordable, and bring all those good jobs home, bring all that lifestyle that we love in Canada so much, bring it home to the way it should be.
I like the way you sound. All right, Rick Perkins, Member of Parliament for South Shore St. Margarets in the beautiful province of Nova Scotia. Thanks for your time. Thanks for your time as well. I know it's summertime, but we will have new content for you every single Tuesday to give you something to listen to on your spare time. Please like, comment, subscribe, and share this program. It is common sense. We need to get this out. Of course, download it on your platforms like CastBox, iTunes, Google Play, and Spotify. It is out there for your convenience. Until next week, remember, low taxes, less government, more freedom. That's the blueprint.